Have you noticed that mindfulness is a term that has been so overused that it's essentially become meaningless? It can apply to playing a sport like tennis or taking a nap or doing some type of formal meditation practice. Maybe you're wondering, what is mindfulness? Maybe you've had a sense that there's something deeper to this practice that is a little bit more than just being in the moment. If so, this video is for you. Hello, my friend. I hope you are well. My name is Matt Tenney. I'm the author of The Magic of Mindful Self-Awareness: How to Stop Overthinking, Clear Your Mind, and Be Happy Almost All the Time. On this channel, I help people apply the practice of mindfulness and mindful self-awareness to be happier, less stressed, and more effective. I look forward to helping you as well, my friend. In this video, I'd like to share some definitions around the topic of mindfulness that I think will be very helpful to you. Most importantly, for making the practice very practical and understanding what it is that we're doing, why we're doing it, and to point out that mindfulness as a practice is a little bit deeper than most people believe that it is. In fact, we're going to even touch on how being mindful is actually in and of itself being the enlightened state. So let's dive in. So when we hear this term mindfulness, I like to break it down into two core ideas. So we have, what does it mean to be mindful? And then what are mindfulness practices? Mindfulness practices, we'll start there because this is the simplest. So mindfulness practices are a wide variety of skillful means that help us to do one of two things. They either help us to wake up to the perspective of being mindful, which we'll address in a moment, or they help us to sustain being mindful, which again we'll address in a moment. But this is it. So mindfulness practices could include actually taking a nap or brushing your teeth or playing tennis. Just about any moment of your life can be part of mindfulness practice. But we want to really hone in on this idea, the key component of mindfulness practices as skillful means that help us wake up to being mindful and or to sustain this being mindful. So let's dive in to what does it mean to be mindful, and then we'll talk about some very specific practices that will make, I think, a lot more sense once we go deeper into what does it mean to be mindful. So to be mindful means that we are aware, and while we're aware, which is if you're alive right now and functioning and hearing, you're clearly aware. But there's a small detail that we often overlook, which is we are aware, but we're not identified with thought in that moment of being aware. This is being mindful. So this means not identified with thought means that we can see our thoughts as objects. We can see them arising and passing away in the mind. We can hear them as though it's an external sound that we could hear on earbuds or in a speaker. And this perspective of being mindful is what creates freedom. Because in any moment that we can see thoughts objectively and are not identified with them, those thoughts cannot create problems for us. They cannot give rise to an unpleasant emotion in the body. They're simply just something that's happening. And it's like watching a movie. I mean, if you're watching a movie and you know that a movie is a movie, it doesn't create any emotional response in the body, right? Like if you're really in a movie, if you're really identified with it, you've identified with all the characters, you've watched it from beginning to end, you can get the sweaty palms, you can feel all the emotions. But if you just walk in the middle of a movie and you just know everyone on the screen is just acting, it doesn't do much, right? It doesn't impact you. And this is exactly how it works when we see our thoughts objectively, they become what they're supposed to be, which they're tools that can help us. They're very useful, but they don't control us. We're not victims of our thoughts. We're not prisoners of our minds. So being mindful is actually, I know some people have this idea of enlightenment as being this grand thing that happens and you're forever free from suffering. It's actually much closer to you than you think. Enlightenment is any moment that you are existing, that you're aware, and you're not identified with thoughts. Now, it may not seem very special when the first couple times that it happens, but one day it's going to click that, oh, when I'm aware of thoughts, what happens is there's no ego present. There is no false sense of self present. And then you're getting a direct experience of what it's like to exist without this false sense of a me messing everything up, right? So being mindful is this. It is seeing thoughts objectively. And if we are observing thoughts objectively, there's a very good chance that we experience brief moments, even if it's just half a second, of what it is like to exist, to be aware without identification with the ego, or without the ego being present at all. Sometimes it can just drop away. So now this hopefully will shed light on what is it that we're doing with all these mindfulness practices. Okay, so the idea with mindfulness practices, the real effort is to remember to try, just to remember to observe our own bodies, to create the conditions for habits to form where we are spending more and more time observing our own bodies and minds versus being identified with the thoughts running through our heads. And this is a really key point. It's not some strong effort, especially in the sitting practice. We don't have to try really hard to focus. We don't have to block thoughts out. We don't have to have some object like the breath that we're just working so hard to focus on. It's way, way simpler than this, and it's actually way easier than this. All that we're trying to do is remember to wake up to this perspective of just being curious, observing our own minds and bodies. Even if this only lasts for a second, and then the effort is as soon as we wake up from distraction to try to do that again. So this is effort number one of this is any skillful means for mindfulness practices that help us to wake up is effort number one. This is one component of mindfulness practices. And these can be some examples of skillful means could be using mental noting. So if you're walking, you could use the inner voice to note just walking. That wakes you up, right? Now you have this perspective of you're aware of your own body and mind. You could use that mental noting during any activity you're doing throughout the day to wake up. Now, the second variety of mindfulness practices are those that help. And initially, I said they help us to sustain this perspective, this of being mindful. But this is not the most precise way of talking about this. So I'm going to go a little deeper here. And what we're really trying to do is create the conditions for this being mindful to sustain itself. Because really, this is our natural state. We've developed this bad habit of identifying with thoughts. And really, what the entire practice of mindfulness is about is breaking this habit, this bad habit of identifying with our thoughts as being me. And instead, learning to just see them as the objects that they are, just see them as tools, something that we can observe, something that we can use when they're skillful, and we can let them go when they're not skillful. So if this is the heart of the practice, is learning to drop this habit. So really the second bucket of mindfulness practices is also much less of an effort. And this is where this can be very, very helpful for your practice. So if you're trying really hard to sustain moments of observing yourself, for instance, or directing awareness in some way, this can be useful in the short term, but in the long term, what it's actually doing is reinforcing identification with mental activity. So the more skillful practice, and this is much harder to do actually, is to do nothing. Okay, so the moment that you wake up and you've turned awareness to where you're observing your own body and mind, at that moment there's nothing else to do. So really what we're doing is with the mindfulness practices that help us to sustain being mindful, it's more that we're creating the conditions for mindfulness to sustain itself. This is our natural way of being. This is our birthright, essentially. We're born perfectly awake, right? And it's through bad habits that we start thinking more and becoming more identified with these thoughts. So what we're trying to do, especially during the sitting still practice, for instance, but even during daily activities, is we're trying to just let go of the habit of re-identifying with thought. And in order to do that, it's really helpful to have kind of a lazy approach, which is to do next to nothing. So once you've started observing your own body and mind, in that moment, you can let go of any effort to direct attention. And if you want to have some type of skillful means, there's a couple. So one is the easiest one is to just be curious, to maintain this attitude of curiosity. And then a lot of people, of course, the second skillful means is to talk about the importance of using the breath. Now, this can be problematic if we're focusing on the breath. Again, this can be useful in the short term, but we don't want to do this for very long. Instead, I recommend you use the breath as a sort of timer. So if you're observing the body and mind, whether it's sitting or walking or during whatever activity, what you're trying to do is instead of trying to keep observing the body, just try to be curious. And don't try to be curious for very long, like for a minute or 2 minutes. Just try to do that for one inhalation. And then again, try to be curious for one exhalation. Just noticing whatever there is to notice without judgment, without trying to fix anything, change anything. You're just being curious, allowing things to be as they are. And it's just for one breath at a time. And in this way, you actually have some awareness of the body breathing, and it starts to build these moments where mindfulness, being mindful, is sustained from moment to moment, and this starts to build some stability of awareness without an effort. So it's kind of happening naturally. Because if you really notice, if you're just being curious and you're not trying to do anything, it's actually really hard not to notice that your body's breathing, especially while sitting still. Try it for a second. Try right now. If you're sitting still, I'd like you to just pause for a moment and just be really curious. Let go of trying to direct attention anywhere and see if you can not notice the fact that your body is expanding and contracting a little bit while it's sitting there, breathing. It's almost impossible, right? Try really hard. Try not to notice. So this is the point, my friend. If you're just being curious and you're using the breath as a sort of a timer, where you're not trying to direct attention to the breath, but it's all, the awareness is already there. You're just using it as a timer to string some moments of curiosity together. This will help you to grow in the practice very, very quickly and with almost no effort. I hope this video was helpful for you. If you have a question about the practice of mindfulness or mindful self-awareness, please be sure to subscribe to this channel and leave your question as a comment in one of the videos on the channel. I'll do my best to answer that question or one like it. If you'd like a great resource for practicing mindfulness and mindful self-awareness, you might like my book, The Magic of Mindful Self-Awareness: How to Stop Overthinking, Clear Your Mind, and Be Happy Almost All the Time. There's a link in the description. Until next time, may you be happy and kind, my friend.